Converted Man here, and I've got the Apex Mind.
Hello everyone.
Thank you for your time and energy to talk to me. We had a fiasco of sorts, and we figured it out and sorted it out, and we're now closer to now we're here to talk about metaphysics, logic, reality, all the simple stuff. We'll figure it all out. We'll answer all the questions except for women. We don't know. Nobody can figure that out.
And we can try.
And then Apex, I was saying this. Now, how do you pronounce this? Because I don't want to try and fail. So, how is this pronounced? Your branch of
So
religion
it's
here?
it's called Kashmir Shaivism. So Kashmir is the region in which this particular what do you call branch of Shaivism is practiced in. That is why it is named after that region, Kashmir Shaivism.
Ah, okay. And it's a subset of Hinduism?
You can call it that. I would personally disidentify Hinduism with the religion tag because I feel like
Or
that's a concept which is fundamentally Western in origin. And
mm.
when you go on to define the different criteria required for a religion, Hinduism might not exactly fall into it.
And then there's all these philosophies that come with this belief system that kind of inform your way of understanding the world. Is that fair to say?
To an extent. So
Okay.
I want to be able to understand the world, and these are certain lenses which help me able to understand certain aspects of reality better.
Okay.
And it's not like I'm dogmatic about it. It's not like Kashmiri Shaivism is the only lens I operate by, right? When I'm trying to understand something, I'll sometimes also try and take a Judeo-Christian point of view. I also try and
Mm.
take an atheistic point of view. I'll try and take a different sorts of believers' point of view, just to get a whole picture of what I am talking about.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, I just have the epistemology of that. I need empirical evidence, repeatable test, or a sound argument. And if I don't have any of those three, then I don't believe the thing, whatever that thing is. Um,
That's a fair worldview.
and so, when dealing with metaphysics, of course, as you do in your videos, that you're constructing a platform from which you can stand upon, and then you can construct it in such a way where it's immune to logic, but it's not technically immune to logic because, well, then it'd be illogical. So, was there a disconnect there? Because I think that I focus on the epistemology, and you were trying to build a metaphysical structure to stand upon.
So the problem, or not exactly the problem, but the question when it comes when it comes to the question of logic, right? Logic is simply a validifier of reasoning, right? It is the
Mm-hmm.
police that comes in and checks, so whatever process of reasoning you did, whether or not it is correct or not on the basis of the rules that we've defined.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to natural sciences, right, these are when you apply logic onto phenomena happening in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And by that logic, we also made a criteria of sorts that things should that whatever test you're prescribing to reality should be repeatable. They should have evidence in the sense that they should have visible phenomena happening in the universe that you can check for again and again, and like five six more criteria to define what really does exist.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. But the point is again, under what parameters does it really exist? Are these five parameters that we've decided? Who decided these parameters? Where did these five parameters come from? That is again ultimately arbitrary at the end of the day. Someone just like woke up one day, gave five reasons, and saw that, okay, now after they already came up with those five reasons, they saw if those five reasons were useful enough to be able to predict reality. And
Mm-hmm.
after repeated testings, they figured out, oh, so this is giving us good results again and again. So therefore, these will be the five criteria that we're going to work with. As of right now, we don't know whether or not there is a sixth criteria or not. These are the five criteria that are working with. And the origination of those five criteria are yet again arbitrary. Someone simply just came up with it. So
Mm-hmm.
that is what happens when you have to make models of reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't because you are going a layer beyond the five criterias of sorts, so it might not exactly fall into it. The only sort of criteria you can two criteria that you can give it, in my understanding, is A, whether or not it is logically consistent within itself, and B, whether or not the observations that it is taking from the reality in order to make uh, those premises that it's working with, whether or not those observations are true or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that the issue I would find perhaps would be that that somebody could construct metaphysics that essentially says that no other metaphysics but itself is valid.
Can you
And
give me an example of such?
well, this happens with presuppositionalism, for example, where you pre-assume that you're correct about X. Usually, X is a god, and you say, well, without this thing, you can't have all these other things. So therefore, I'm already right, and I've won the argument. There's no discussion because I'm right. The end. And it's very frustrating. You don't get anywhere. It's not a logical system. It's just I'm right. Play a game, flip a coin. Heads I win, tails you lose. Wait a minute. That's not a. It's not a game worth playing because you can't. There isn't even a game there.
I
And
get
so
it.
if I
So it's like,
presuppose that
mhm.
my if I presuppose that my metaphysics is the only true metaphysics, and I say, well, it's the only one that really works. All the other ones are fake because it said so. And then you're like, well, but it's wrong. No, you're not allowed to say that because you have to use my metaphysics to show that it's wrong, and you can't do that without admitting it's right. So.
Mm, all right. See, again, I think that it does. I get what you're trying to say. It's that in order to prove something true, there must be a condition where it is false, right? You cannot
Mhm.
uh, presuppose like one or zero without both of them existing in the same place. So if you're defining a premise in which there is no way to falsify your claims, then ultimately uh, it doesn't really showcase truth, because truth cannot exist in absence of a condition where it is not true. True is a positive affirmation or a positive understanding, so there should be a negative consequence of sorts also. But I think the major point, I agree with that, right? But I believe the two criteria I gave, the logical consistency one, and more importantly, the true observation from reality one,
Mhm.
that is where you can attack the argument, right? You can be like, these five observations that you made are false for this particular reasoning,
Mhm.
and that is how you can falsify that argument. And if it is something which is just logically internally consistent but does not rely on any observation from the surroundings, then it might as well be imagination, right? Because it is not qualifying the two criterias that are required for anything to be called reasoning. It doesn't matter
Mhm.
what kind of reasoning it is.
Right, right. You have to, like I said, we're both kind of agreeing on that you have to have some way to verify the system itself is working. So you can't just make a metaphysical system and declare yourself the ultimate champion of the only truth. I suppose somebody can and has tried to do that, but it doesn't work because it's not even a system. You have to have something that says, well, no, here's how we know that works. You can't just say it works. It's not
Right.
good enough. You owe me $10. Why? Because I said so. It's not good enough. You need a something there to give. Um, so when when looking at epistemology, I laid out mine. Do you have a particular epistemology that you apply across the board or try to?
um Not necessarily. I think epistemology, or the understanding of knowledge itself, is preceded by what is knowledge, right? So I am more so interested in the fundamental axioms of what even forms knowledge in the first place. What does it mean to even know? You give See, I if I have to go on to read scientific studies on particular things and I have to understand how the world works, there is like
Mm.
endless amount of information on that. But every single time I go on to do that, I see that they have a specific criteria, and the first question that I always end up asking is, okay, how is that criteria formed? And according to what I have understood, at least, it's the fact that there are certain fundamental assumptions that you make after observing reality. Then you make a logically consistent system out of it. That is what we call logic and math,
Mm,
set theory. And on the basis of that, we apply it to physical phenomena or physical reality that we see, right? The natural sciences of sorts. And you keep going until you reach more of soft sciences, psychology, and everything. So everything at the end of the day originates from the point of assumption. You make an
mm,
assumption about reality, and then whether or not it is useful, that determines if that is true or not. Perhaps science will fail at certain points. I think we are actually failing in certain things, right? That is the reason something as large of a logical leap as multiverse theory exists. It's because certain at certain points mathematics simply fails. So instead of going back and seeing what were the fundamental assumptions that we took in set theory, perhaps that made it so that we are making a mistake here, now we are just using science as dogmatic religion, because okay, this can't be wrong, so far it has helped us, so this can't be wrong. Now let's make assumptions about reality on the basis of that. So that is where I somehow find science hypocritical in a certain sense, and therefore I'm more interested in how even knowing, even the process of knowing is formed. And that is
mm.
why my recent interest in certain religious, what do you call it?
Yeah.
Paths, specifically Kashmir Shaivism, because I think their understanding, or Hinduism in general, has just one understanding, that the only thing which is real is the process of observation.
Mm.
Everything else is something that you've inferred.
Yeah, well, I'm not a scientist cosmologist, so I can't really speak on the multiverse theory or hypothesis or how they came up with it or why or anything like that. It's one idea of many different ideas in cosmology. Um, and whether or not the model turns out to be predictive or not will be whether or not it's accepted in science, because it's, as far as I understand, it's one hypothesis. It's not necessarily even a theory as such, because it doesn't necessarily have the explanatory power that other cosmological models have right now. It Listening to, as I have, scientists talk about cosmology, it seems that string theory is pretty much the way they're kind of headed as the way to understand the universe. And it's also way above my head. And it's like, okay, guys, you said words, all right, keep doing that, whatever you're doing, you guys figure it out, let me know. And I'm fine with the mystery. I don't need to know how it all works. I'm happy to I'd love to know, but I don't know, so that's fine. And I'll let the smart people figure it out eventually, if we can figure it out. And until then, well, I don't know. That's fine. Um, but as far as whether or not it's based on an assumption to start with, I don't know if that's relevant or not. We go, okay, well, how does this thing work? Like, you have a door behind you of some sort, and well, we suspect that the handle will go up and down because that's what those type of handles do. But as for all I know, that handle might just be painted on there, and it's an optical illusion, and it's whatever. And so, well, there's certain behaviors I can expect about reality that might turn out to not be correct because I was incorrect about my observation. But if I was allowed to test it, then I would see, okay, it does indeed, crank just like every other handle that looks like that does. And, so the testability of the phenomenon that I observe allows me to know more about it. Whereas when you're dealing with something ethereal, spiritual, God, that sort of supernatural realm, uh, the testability and the observation all go kind of out the window. And I there's a reason for that, but I'm wondering why you think that uh, what do you think of any of that?
Yeah, so the way that I understand it, it's a abductive reasoning argument always. It's
Hmm.
the best explanation argument. I mean, even in string theory, from what I understand, their equations broke after a certain point, right? Math was not
Hmm.
mathing in the things that they were observing. So they assumed as using abductive reasoning, they assumed certain extra dimensions, and once they were able to assume that, now in that assumption, their equations started working again, and that
Hmm.
is the reason I think they have like 26 dimension in string theory. It's all an assumption
Yeah.
at the end of the day. And the
Yeah.
reason they're making those assumptions is because it is the best plausible explanation they can come up with right now. So I
Hmm.
think I sort of made this on my whiteboard also. So the way that I understand all the three sorts of reasoning is this: deductive reasoning is a car, right? It takes you to short distances. It's very precise. It can take you from house to house. That is what it can do, and it is very accurate also. It gets you across. That is the reason people prefer deductive reasoning. Then there is inductive reasoning, which is based on patterns, right? If triangle, square, triangle, square, triangle, square, they're repeating, and you stop at square, what is the next thing that is going to come? You're going to assume it's a triangle. That is inductive
Hmm.
reasoning. It's like a train. It's not as precise, but it is decent enough. It takes you to a longer distance, right? You don't
Hmm.
have to do deductive reasoning. And now abductive reasoning is like, if all I witness in the world is triangles and squares, I'm going to assume that there are no curvature possible. There are no circles in this world, and that is just the best explanation possible for the event. So it is like a airplane. It's very fast. It takes you from countries to countries, but it cannot even be as accurate as a train, right? Airports are usually very farther away from the city. So if you have to reach truth, which is very close to you, right? If you already have the premises laid, you just have to take one more step, you'll use deductive reasoning. If you have to reach truth, which is quite far away, you're going to first use inductive reasoning, then use deductive reasoning, and reach the truth. And ultimately, for truth, something like God, which is like beyond the scope of the universe, you have to understand that. You have to start with abductive reasoning every single time. Then you have to do inductive reasoning. Then you go into deductive reasoning, and then you reach the truth. What most people do is they use in abductive reasoning, and you don't exactly quite reach the truth, but you are in the ballpark of the truth. And then they claim that XYZ thing is completely proven. It is not logically accurate, but it
Hmm.
is still the best explanation possible. And almost, I mean, not exactly there, but they're using the same methodology that even scientists use, because it is a valid
Hmm.
form of reasoning.
Well, I think that if I was to have an analogy of sticking with transportation, I would say that my method that I'm utilizing is a wormhole that is instantaneous, because you immediately get to whether or not you should or shouldn't accept the idea, and it's very simple to use. And not only is it simple to use, but it can be demonstrated to work and has been demonstrated to work every single time so far.
So far. So far.
And well, that's why you're skeptical. That's why you don't just believe, you
Yeah.
test. And that method is essentially what's called informal logic as opposed to formal logic, which is its own thing. But informal logic deals with natural language, which is, well, any and every language we have is essentially a natural one, and using the ideas that are in formal logic. A is B, B is C, therefore A is C. Okay, so there's a nice little formula, but what the bleep is A and B? What are you talking about? It's just all variables, so until once you make it into the talking about something real, then that's informal logic. Socrates Socrates was a if Socrates is sorry, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. So you
Deductive
have
reasoning.
some, you have something actually real that you're talking about rather than just saying A B B C. You're talking about something concrete and real, and that's informal logic. And so you say, well, if I identify a logical fallacy, then whoever wrote that argument, whoever said the argument, has basically done the math wrong, if you will. And so now we can't say that it's not true because we don't. That's not what logic does. It just says your argument sucked. Now we don't believe it. and that's it. Go fix your argument, come back, and then we'll try again. And until you do, I don't know if it's true or not, but I definitely know I can't believe it because your argument is broken. And so I would say that the use of informal logic is an instant uh, portal, wormhole technology because it's just, okay, I've got my answer. I analyzed it and I found one logical fallacy. That's all I need. Now I can just move on to the next thing.
That's perfectly fine. And I represented what you're describing to be informal logic is for like is it's the same as deductive reasoning from what I understand, because it takes premise A, premise B, and on the basis of that you form a direct conclusion, right? So I see it as a car, right? If you have to reach a friend's house, you can directly reach, you can put your car right in front of the friend's house and immediately you see your friend. But what if your friend lives, let's say, in India? How do you use your car to reach to India? That is the question, right? You have to reach to India because that is the question that you're trying to answer. How do you do it with a car?
Right. Well, that's why I'm saying you're using a teleporter. Basically, you're just instantly there. You're not using the car anymore. You're using something faster and more robust. You're just
I get the
instantly there.
wormhole analogy, but you cannot see, even in even in informal logic as you described it, you were very close to the conclusion, right? You had a premise, you had premise A, you had premise B, and the conclusion was just right there. You just applied those two together and you get the answer, right?
Right.
But when you have, but reality is often not like that, right? In reality, there are questions which do not have such simple premises, and yet in order to form a model or an understanding of reality, human beings have done all sorts of reasoning to get there. So what I'm trying to say is that depending on how far the conclusion is, you are going to use different means to get there. That does not mean that just because someone has used abductive reasoning, they have the exact right answer. You don't, right?
Well,
but you are getting closer to it, at least.
Logic is, of course, limited in a respect. It is a tool, and it relies on observation of reality in the end to decide whether what fallacies, if any, were made. So, although I could construct an argument using formal logic, if I translate it into informal logic, and it sounds right, but something is wrong with it, and I'll give an example in a moment, then we have to be skeptical of the conclusion. So, either my light is on or it is off. That's premise one. Well, okay, that's fair enough. Then I say, well, if lobsters exist, then my light is off. Then the conclusion is, well, therefore my light is off. And you go, wait a minute. Lobsters have nothing to do with your light being on or off. But how do you know that? Well, because, where in reality does that line up? You need another argument now for that to be true. And I'm like, yeah, and plus my light is on. It's just right there. We didn't need any argument. We could just look at my light. So there's a limit to it. And so then we have a different methodology, which is, we call science, where we say, hey, is that a light? Yeah, it is. So is it on? Yeah, it sure is. Okay, can we test that? Sure, we can get all sorts of devices to test whether it's a light or not, And so we have another methodology at our disposal called the methods of science. So I think science plus informal logic is, as far as I know, the best way to know what is real. And when dealing with, but what if I believe in something that I can't verify? I go, well, why would you believe in something you can't verify? Why would you believe in something you can't test? And then you get the sort of bad arguments that I've heard many times. You don't. It's like, what's a spirit or a soul? What is the afterlife? What is this supernatural? What is God? What are these things that you're talking about? But more importantly, how do you know that those things are what you say that what you said they are? Uh, and so, what's your methodology to determine that?
So let me just say something. So when you are saying that we have two things that we can do, we can either apply informal logic or deductive reasoning, or we can apply science, which is testable phenomena, right? These are the two things that you're saying. I say science actually comes under the category of reasoning itself, because
Huh.
in science you are inherently using inductive reasoning. You
Mm.
see observation happening, you see a pattern forming, and then you infer that this
Mm.
pattern is always going to continue. For example, I see that 100 people over the course of 10 years go into a gym, they do this, and over a period of time, they build muscle, right? I might
Right.
not know what is going on inside the body, what
Mm.
reaction is going on from that. But when
Mm.
the 101th person will come, science will beat its chest and be like, yes, you will build muscle because we have observed it. Bro, you are using
Mm.
inductive reasoning, you're not using deductive reasoning, right?
Mm.
That is all of what science is. Science ends at inductive reasoning of sorts. Sometimes it goes into deductive reasoning, but for most phenomena, most complex phenomena, we're always making correlations and associations on the basis of patterns that we see in nature.
Mm.
So science itself is not hard logic, it is soft logic because it is using inductive
Mm.
reasoning. And
No,
then
because you have data. You collect the data.
again, what is data? What is
Well,
data?
it depends on what we're.
If not, data is repeated patterns, right? You
Yeah.
keep seeing those patterns again and again,
Right.
and therefore you assume just because they've happened 110 million times that it is going to
Right.
happen one more time. That is
Right.
still inductive reasoning. You're still
Right.
assuming. You don't know
Yeah.
whether or not that ends right there. So
Mm.
even science is not hard logic. It is not premise A,
Mm.
premise B forming a conclusion. Science is soft logic.
Well, but
And then
no,
there,
no, because yeah, you're also setting aside mathematics, which is a science of sorts. So we wouldn't be able to speak as we are without these computers, and these computers are the result of science. So it certainly is
I don't say
something that
science doesn't work. I am simply saying that
no.
science is not using direct logic of sorts. It is seeing patterns and it is
No,
putting them together to assume that certain things are going to
no, it's
happen. There
not
is
an
a
assumption.
method.
Not really.
It is an
I
assumption. Of course,
no.
if I am seeing four apples lined up and I assume there is going to be a fifth apple, you're going to say it's a big assumption. If I see a 1 million apples lined up and I assume there is going to be a million and one apple,
Yeah, but that's
is
not
that
how
still not
science
assuming?
works. That's not
That's
science.
literally how
That's not
science
the
works.
method.
If you say it is
No, it's not.
testable, if it is
No.
repeatable, what does repeatable
Yeah.
mean?
Right. That's what I'm saying. If it's testable and repeatable, but your analogy isn't that. And that's the problem with analogies is they can only get you so far. And so
No,
I
I'm
think
simply
that
asking you, what is scientific criteria if not inductive reasoning? If it is not an
no,
assumption,
it's more
what
than
is it?
that because because you have the data and you have the observations and you
Again,
have the testing and
observations, data,
not
and
oh
tests,
and
are those all not just identifying patterns and assuming?
no. No, because
Yes.
you observe X, you write about X, and you have somebody else observe and write down
Yes.
something, and you all compare notes, and you go, hey, did we all look at different stuff, or we all look at the same thing? Okay, well, it looks like we all looked at the same thing,
So it's
and
democratic.
well, no,
If five people
not
exist in the world and
necessarily.
they all agree I see blue, this is
Yeah,
definitely blue. It's
right.
not simply me looking at it and
Right.
observing it, seeing a pattern
And
and assuming it is blue.
not just humans, but also we try to take ourselves as much as we can out of that by having machines that can test what the blue is. And so we can go, okay, when that thing that we've labeled blue emits this pattern, and so if we identify that pattern, we can see, hey, that thing, when we shined a light on it, the detector said it was blue, and so now we can know that it is detecting that it's blue and that we're not all being fooled by our eyeballs. But again, it's all empirical. It's all empirical. It's all there for real.
What?
And when it and so that's what we need. We need evidence. And so evidence is the observation, not just observations, but testing and retesting. And whether you want to call it assumption or not, whatever.
You're going
But
to have
it works.
you're going to have a field day this with this one. Just Google what the word empirical means. See the first definition that pops up.
Well, that's an appeal to definition.
Fine, just look it up.
No, that'd be your burden.
Sure. So it says that empirical means based on, concerned with, or verifiable by observation or experience rather than theory or pure logic.
Okay.
It is observation dependent, and so anything which is observation dependent is observing on and making an assumption on the basis of the pattern that is being witnessed. Ultimately, no matter how reliable it is in predicting outcomes, it is still an assumption that we are making on the basis of data that we have. Data just allows us to make better assumptions because the pattern has repeated so many times.
Okay.
But that is still an assumption.
And what's the problem with that?
The problem with that, it is not inherently informal logic. It is an assumption that we're making on the basis of reality. In fact, again, it's sometimes it's inductive reasoning. It's not hard logic, right? And it's because you're making an assumption.
What do you mean by hard logic? What do you mean by hard logic?
Hard logic is premise A, premise B, and then you
formal,
it accordingly.
Right? That's formal logic, right?
Yeah, formal logic.
But it is.
It's not that.
It is. But it is.
It's observation based. It's
because we have no choice but to. I mean, how
assumption
do we...
on the semantics of an observation?
No, it's not assumption. But even if it was assumption, and I'll just tentatively grant that because I don't care to argue over semantics. Who cares? It still works. We have a system that works. What do you got?
If a system works,
what do you got? What's your system?
If you say so, your argument here is that if a system works, therefore it might as well be called as truth.
Called a what?
Truth. We're assuming it to be true based on utility, right?
Well, I think that we have the nearest thing to the truth that we could get because, it's dealing with reality and it's allowing us to shape reality in new ways and whatnot.
So it's useful. So
yes.
It's true.
Well, no, it is true if we have the compounding evidence to know that it is true.
What is evidence?
Or it's at least as close as we already covered that. So we're not going to repeat ourselves here. So,
I'm simply saying
I have,
of it all,
that's why I said, what's your epistemology? And what was interesting is you didn't really seem to know what your epistemology was per se. You're saying that it's
move goalposts here. Let's stick to the fact that we were discussing, right? That ultimately science is soft logic. It's not hard logic. It's simply based on assumptions.
It's not based on assumptions. You're wrong.
Okay, prove it. Prove that it is not based on assumptions. How is not observing and assuming an outcome not assumption?
But you're not assuming the outcome. You're basing it on gathered data.
Yeah, what is data? Again, we're circling the same thing.
It's the same thing. You're saying
I gave you what it is. You tell me where I make the mistake in all.
I'm telling you, but you want it to be assumption, so it doesn't matter what I say.
Again,
you've decided that you're right, even though you're wrong. You haven't studied the scientific method. That's the problem. You haven't studied informal logic. Well, exactly. You don't know. What is informal logic? Have you studied that? No. That's the problem. You get it?
Now, what are you again appealing to? Again, I am giving you
I'm appealing to
I am giving you examples. I am giving you exact picture of what I mean. What you are right now doing is you're using words, you're using definitions, you're using
using logic.
Ideas containing work, and you're not using logic.
Yes,
right? You're hiding behind words. You're hiding behind words. You're not.
No, you're doing that.
If there is a pattern, if there is A, B, A, B, A, B for a million times, and it ends at A, and we have to assume what the next thing is going to be.
Yes.
This is all data, right?
Right.
If we say that the answer will be B, is that logical, or is that still an assumption based on a previous pattern?
It is logical based on the pattern.
No, it's an
You
assumption.
want to call it that you want to call it an assumption is
We do
irrelevant.
not see a B happening, right? You're assuming there is going to be a B on the basis
Based
of a
on the
previous
pattern,
pattern.
yes.
Just because it is based on something, that
Okay.
does not take it away from the fact that it is still an assumption.
And then when we test it, we find, hey, there is a B. Then I guess we were right about it, weren't we?
And if we test it and we find, oh, there is not a B, our mathematics break,
then we need to
make up
revise.
dimensions in order to prove it.
We need to revise
As string
our
theory
testing methods. We don't we?
See,
We need to
I am
revise
not
the question.
again. Let's like
So
calm down the
you know,
temperature. I'm not saying exactly that science
Right.
is unuseful, that it doesn't work.
Right.
But
But
when
you don't
we
have a
see
system.
when we see that
Right.
inductive logic works, that making assumptions works, if it is
Right.
if it
Science
is
works.
if,
I agree.
yeah, if it works in able to if you're able to test phenomena, or if
Right.
you not even test phenomena, it works simply by the virtue of us recognizing a pattern. Once
Right.
you start doing it for other concepts, once you start doing it for things which are not inherently based in sensory information, is not inherently based in a democratic sort of understanding of I see three things, suddenly the methodology itself is incorrect. That is not
Yeah,
the
when
case.
you don't use it correctly, you get to the wrong conclusion, which is what the problem is, and what I've been saying, that if your conclusion is this supernatural, ethereal, spiritual, whatever you want to name it, God thing, whatever. Well, okay, we go, okay, well, the epistemology of science and informal logic don't seem to work on that for whatever reason. And instead, what you now need is you need an excuse to make and say, well, I'll just make my own methodology and pretend that methodology gets me to God. And that's what many believers do. And I think that's what you're doing, is you're just building your own methodology and pretending like it works without demonstrating that your methodology works. So what is the thing that proves that if I say this thing is God, and I say, okay, I have made a claim about reality that this is God. I named it God, so it's technically its name's God, but is it God? Well, I don't know. I'm saying it's God, but is it God?
I mean, if its name is God, then it is God. Right?
Okay,
It is
cool.
It is a thing given the name God.
Right.
The word is arbitrary at the end of the day. Whether you use God, whether you use blah, whether you use can, it doesn't matter,
what's
right?
God then?
Again, words are ultimately used to refer to a particular sort of concept. And when you are trying to argue God, there is going to be a distinction in what different cultures mean by God and their methodology of getting there.
So how do we know what God is then?
God is defined within a framework, within a understanding amongst what is that. For example, you and I cannot agree on blue until both of us are in the same framework of what blue is.
Right.
If I define blue to be this color, only then we can agree on blue, right?
I agree.
Similarly, in order to get what God is, we need to have the same understanding of what we are trying to prove and disprove. For example, if someone is trying to prove a Judeo-Christian God, then they can't go and use arguments from a different culture. Then they can't go and use arguments from a different understanding of God. You're not proving the same God. And you cannot argue with that person also if the point was to prove the Judeo-Christian God. Right? If the point was to prove the Judeo-Christian God, you can't argue with that person anymore because they're not even trying to prove that particular problem. The biggest hurdle in disproving, proving, or whatever with God is what is God. There is a definition point of view, right? We have to understand what God is.
And not even that, but it's deeper than that, because the question is, behind that question is, how do we humans know? Yes, we gave it that definition. Okay. But how do we know that that definition is the right definition for that thing? Just because we said so? We said, hey, I like that this thing is, I like that this thing is God, whatever. Nobody cares. Nobody's going to worship it. Well, unless I made a religion, and then maybe people will worship it as God. Because why not? People are weird. But to demonstrate that it is God, not just a definition, but actually God, well, that's going to require some other thing than just fiat, than me saying it's God. Everybody worship God now. It's like, what are you talking about? No, and again, maybe I could convince people if I made a religion, read The Lobsterist, but but regardless, well, actually, if you read The Lobsterist, you wouldn't believe this is God. You believe that the Lord is God. But at any rate, the point is that the definition is what we've come up with, but we don't know that that is God. We just said that that's God. So we got to go, okay, how do we know what God is? Okay, well, we need a methodology. Well, what methodology are we going to use? Well, you want to use deductive or inductive reasoning. Fair enough, fine. Based on inductive and deductive reasoning, well, maybe there's a limit to that. Maybe that only gets us so far. But sure, let's use that. But as long as it's consistent and logical, then fine. But, well, wait a minute, why are we introducing logic? I thought we were only using inductive and because logic has a structure to it, right? So we still need a system. And I say the methodology of science and or informal logic, that those are definitely systems that we have observed working. So what is your system that you want to utilize to get us to the conclusion of a particular version of God?
Okay. Since we're like talking about the God argument, I personally try to use reasoning. That is how I go about doing things, and the way that I define reasoning is something which is observation from true phenomena in the world and a logically consistent model that you provide, which has some utility. If you fulfill those three criteria, then it is a logically consistent reasoning, in my opinion. And the three ways for you to go about doing that is either through deductive reasoning, either through inductive reasoning, either through abductive reasoning. God being the kind of truth that it is in my model, it is very far away. So you always have to start off with the best explanation form possible. Then you apply inductive reasoning in order to see patterns, and only then you come up to deductive reasoning. Right? If you're able to complete all those three things, only then you can say you have completely really proven God. Right? But you might, if you just fail at a certain point, or let's say you just don't are not able to go to the third sort of reasoning, that can still be a decent enough model that perhaps can work and people can believe in. That is a lot of what religion really is at the end of the day. Because when I look at the history of religion, I don't care if it is a weird concept that people, it's an absurd concept to me, that people are following. My question is, why is this concept, why was this believable to the first people who heard about it? And why did this survive for so many thousands of years? There must have been some form of validity, maybe some form of thought that came to the first believers that led them to the conclusion that this might be true. So we can, if we want to understand why do people believe in God, we can go about that way, right? uh, for me to prove what I mean by God, I'll have to take you into the whole what do you call metaphysical understanding of the world by dharmic faiths. If you want, I can do that. Let me know. I really love talking about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd have to see that the methodology can be used on other things as well besides just this God thing. And that's really the whole point of this whole discussion is, the methodologies is like and I get where you're coming from. You like metaphysics, you like philosophy. Obviously, you have, a great mind there going, and it's just we're differencing on the approaches that we take to get to the conclusion. Because when it comes to God, I don't believe. I'm a skeptic, and I'm a skeptic. Well, for a lot of reasons. I didn't want to be a skeptic. It just that's what happened to me because I went to look for the evidence and didn't find any. And well, I assumed that there was evidence. Well, I was wrong. There wasn't. So and that's just for my particular religion, and maybe I missed something. So okay, cool, and that's why I do these talks. So it's like maybe somebody has that thing that I'm missing, and then I can be converted again, and then I'll change my channel name. It'll be really weird, but at any rate, And so
Deconverted, man.
yeah, reconverted man. People have thrown that at me. I'd be lobster boy because I think that would be funny. The people like, why are you lobster boy? Oh, I don't know, man. Or some other weird name. Who knows? But at any rate, so yeah, the reason why people believe, well, there's a lot of deep psychological reasons why people believe in anything, but the God thing, it tends to form around certain things that cause what's called an existential crisis in humans, where we recognize that we are mortal and that we'll die. We don't like that. That really bothers us, and
Sure.
so we go, well, I know what it's like to be me. I know what it's like to exist. I don't know what it's
Hmm.
like to not exist. So I'm going to,
Hmm.
come up with this thing was like, well, yeah, sure, they're dead here, but that's not them. They are, well, they're not here. I don't know where they are, but they're not, they're somewhere else. They still exist. And so that became an idea and got extrapolated and evolved and changed
Subductive
throughout
reasoning of
time.
sorts.
Yeah. And it's like, well, look, it's hard to not, it is impossible to experience not being. And for myself, I tried to. I went under for a minor medical thing, a colonoscopy, because I'm old. Uh, and they put you under. So there's that moment of, right before that moment, I was like, okay, I felt the medicine kicking in, and then there wasn't anything until I woke up again. And so I couldn't know what it was like to not be. It just wasn't there. So that's really weird, and to
Hmm.
try to think about, you know, and I've thought about it. I'm like, man, if that's what death is, there isn't even,
Hmm.
I won't even know that I'm dead. I won't know anything. There isn't a there. And that's very odd to try to understand at any level. And so I think that that's where religion tries to hijack that and say, well, no, you keep on going. And I'm like, well, that's nice, but I don't have proof of that.
Hmm.
So why would I believe it? For some religions they have the, oh, what is it Hinduism, or is it a different one where it's the Nirvana, which is like non-existence sort of that you're trying to aim for? So I'm like,
Uh,
well, that's basically atheism anyways.
yeah,
So
it's across dharmic faiths, and like the word itself, nirvana, is particularly
yeah.
from Buddhism, but
Oh, okay.
the
Oh,
whole
I'm sorry.
non-existent things, we call it moksha,
Oh,
right?
okay.
And it's across Eastern spirituality. It's
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
considered to be the single best, because you're so done with just being alive and having to suffer your days that you're like, just let this end. I do not want to reincarnate. I do
yeah,
not want to
yeah,
go to any afterlife. Even the concept of a very nice, happy-go-lucky afterlife in which you get unlimited pleasure is seen as suffering. Because
yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
it's still existence. Damn
yeah.
it! I
There's
want to
a
not exist.
there's a TV show. I don't know if you've watched it, but I've recommended it more than once, called The Good Place. And
Mhm.
they're in the good place, and eventually, well, there's all sorts of problems there, and it's not really the good place, but at any rate, they're in the afterlife, and they get to the same problem where it's like the people there are bored because they've done everything they want to do. So they're like, well, we need to invent a way for them to die, basically forever. And so they make this little portal that you can walk through, and then you're just gone. And so then they've improved the afterlife by allowing people, if they want to end their existence. So I'm like, well, there you go. That sounds good. There's a way to exit if you get bored. So you get to enjoy yourself as long as you want, but at some point, if you get bored and you're tired and you've done everything, and you're like, okay, then you can exit. And well, but once you exit, you can't go. There's no undo button to that. But at any rate, I thought that that was a good solution to that problem. And there are some religions, like Eastern religions, that kind of say, well, we all kind of wind up at that point where we aren't anymore. And I'm like, well, okay, whatever. I mean, it's already what I guess is going to happen. I don't know. I would love it to be something else. I have no idea. Consciousness is tied to my brain as far as I can tell, but that doesn't, I don't know. I'm skeptical. So,
I mean, the way that I understand consciousness, at least, is the fact that it's a, what do you call, illusion of sorts in your own
mm,
brain, so that you can make sense of things. Right? I can't tell this thing distinct from myself
mm,
without me being something. Right? You
yeah, yeah,
observe, that is true. The fact that you can feel, the fact that you can observe, that is true, because that is literally what is going on. But the fact that there is an observer within, whether it is me, whether it is something else, is again an assumption that we're making, because it's an abductive reasoning
mm,
assumption, right? There must be consciousness because I am able to do
yeah,
this. There is no proof for it.
yeah,
It is simply a useful assumption that everyone makes,
yeah.
that there must be
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, I think therefore I am, sort of thing. Right? Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
it's an assumption.
yeah,
In fact, I
reality
wrote
is
a philosophical.
yeah.
Sorry.
Reality being real. It's like, well, yeah. I mean, if we're in the Matrix, whatever, then that's real. But there's no reason to think that we are unless we have evidence that we are. So it doesn't. It's like, well, that's an interesting idea, but whatever. It's just an idea. So if it is a simulation, well, who the bleep's in charge of the simulation? And then who's in charge of their simulation? And it keeps going, which is kind of where you got with God to some extent in your video, where you
Yeah.
hit an
So the point
an
is,
infinity,
if
right?
you're going to assume a creator, there's going to be
Yeah,
an infinite regression of
right,
sorts, right?
right.
It wouldn't make sense for you to make an assumption that any creation requires a creator without you having to fall into the same logic again and again until you land
Yeah,
up in an infinite
right,
regressive
right,
series of sorts.
right,
So
right,
there is that is how, like, sometimes abductive reasoning has limits, right?
right,
It
right. In
might be
the
abductive,
same
but
way,
it might.
and then in the same way, the with the multiverse, I suppose we could say that they've come up with this. It's a similar thing to God on top of God, where you just have an infinite amount of universes. Then you're bound to get a universe with life in it, and maybe a universe where there's nothing but life, and a universe devoid of life, and a universe where pancakes are lobsters and lobsters are pancakes, whatever, And I'm like, okay, but then wouldn't there be a universe where we could contact ourselves from this universe and do that now? Oh, it didn't work, so that universe must not exist, right?
Yeah. Where is my multi-dimensional version who is traveling through all the universes
Yeah,
and giving me a
exactly.
portal girl to do the same?
Yeah,
Where is he?
there's a version of me. Oh, I did this for the Mormon faith. They have a belief in Mormonism where if you work hard enough, that eventually you become God of your own planet. And I'm like, okay, well, if that's true, then since I'm God, I can travel in time and tell myself to join that religion. And since I didn't do that, then that means either the religion isn't true or I didn't work hard enough to become God. So either way, there's no reason to join Mormonism. And I thought I was
But
quite clever.
I wonder if that, like, directly disproves the infinite reality where everything happens thing. Because if
Yeah.
X thing that did not happen, that means that assumption itself would be wrong, right?
Yeah. So there's a logical limit of realities, perhaps, where only the logically possible can happen. Maybe the core nature of reality is no paradox allowed, or something like that. Although who knows? But if paradox is allowed, well then, who knows? Then everything's allowed, and that's a problem. So I think
One
that would, you know.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've noticed, like, because I was actually a atheist for like a very long period of time. Like, I grew up in a
Mm,
Hindu household,
yeah.
and around eighth standard is like eighth grade is when I
Hmm.
like got introduced to the internet. I was all, I think there was some dark matter 2025 or some other
Yes.
guy who has
Yes.
that angel logo. I used to watch his videos. I used
Hmm.
to debate feminists and believers all across the internet, and I had like a decent track record of writing paragraphs
Hmm.
and things. So I think when I was in 10th grade, I debated 35 members of my family in a marriage sort of setting. on this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, the reason, this is my personal reason, right? This is not to say anything
Mm-hmm.
else, is after like many years of being an atheist, I realized that beyond a certain point, uh, you're still like atheists are very natural and they're naturalists, right? But they're
Mm-hmm.
also people who fall into the appeal to authority fallacy a lot. It's like this scientific terminology or this scientific at least domain hasn't proven xyz thing, therefore it is not real. And like a real person who is into science would say that so far, given the evidence that we have proof of this, and this is still something that we don't know,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if you start noticing the behavior of people in that particular community, it is very dogmatic in nature. It is very very certain in nature. I have never seen a scientist as certain as I have seen a random person on the internet being true of the same thing that that scientist has
Well,
proven.
well, I'll tentatively grant that you have observed that, and say that my counter to it would be that the behavior of a group of people does not tell you whether their ideas are true or not. So,
No, it's just my personal grievance on
right, yeah, I
that.
mean,
Like,
whether or not,
it's
I'm
not.
just,
Yeah.
like there's nice Christians, there's mean Christians, there's nice atheists, there's mean atheists.
Of course.
I've encountered all kinds. I encountered a guy that thought God was zero. That was fun. So I mean, everybody out there under the sun and then some. And I've been in a real jerk at times. Uh, and I try not to be. We try to be better people, and well, who knows if we succeed or not. But
What I Yeah, sorry. There was a thing that I wanted to mention.
yeah,
It's
go
the
ahead.
fact that when I understood the definition of an atheist, right, it was
Hmm.
someone who lacked a belief in God,
Right.
and that was very that was perfect for me, right? Because again,
Hmm.
who really, because belief is again, it's a whole hogwash of things when you
Right.
start believing in shit.
But other.
But what I have noticed in practice, just like certain other particular movements, it's more so an anti-theistic movement rather than an atheistic movement. That is why people also had to introduce other terminology like an agnostic atheist. Like
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
just call it an atheist. It's literally just atheist who
Yeah.
lack
Right.
belief.
Yeah. There's the whole category: agnostic theist, gnostic theist, agnostic atheist, agnostic atheist, and all this, or weak and strong, and you can get all very technical because, well, people love to be technical, and I go, yeah, I know all that stuff. I don't really need it per se. I don't really use it that much. I use it when appropriate to use. Labels have their limits. They're useful to whatever degree they're useful. Even the label skeptic that I apply to myself, what I mean by skeptic, isn't what the word skeptic means on the dictionary. So I'm like, screw it, whatever. I'll just be this whatever. And so we have the thing in common, I think, between the theist and non-theist is we're both trying to figure out reality. And I think that we're simply using different systems. And one complaint I hear from theists, broadly speaking, is that God can't be tested by science. And I go, well, how do you know that? And it's like, well, because of course it can't be, because we already have decided that God is X, Y, and Z, and one of those things is untestable by science. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't know that. I mean, you don't know
Okay,
that. You
okay.
believe, so it's kind of weird. But other than
Let me
this,
try and steel man that particular
yeah,
argument.
but hold
So
on. But you did say something I wanted to question you about, which was, okay, so atheists tend to be dogmatic or whatever. But what was it that convinced you about God's existence? So
okay, so I'll be honest. So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
in that particular religion that I mentioned, Kashmir
Hmm.
Shaivism is probably where I align with most. There is also Advait Vedant. Those are similar in nature, right? So their belief is ultimately that everything that you're witnessing as of right now, right? X, Y, Z thing, this bottle, this me, this thing, these are all senses based, right? This is you understand these exist on the basis of sensory perceptions that you have. Correct? Have you heard of the brain in a vat like thought experiment, which believes that if you are in a jar, if you're a brain in a jar and you've been plugged in and
Mm-hmm.
you are fed senses, what
Mm-hmm.
happens?
Right.
You will assume there is an entire reality, right? Maybe you are the
Mm-hmm.
brain in the jar and I don't even exist right now. There is no live
Right.
stream going on.
Yeah.
You are not there and you're just simply experiencing
Right.
it. So the thing is, again, how do I the only way for me to prove or disprove something is through, again, sensory perception. But if sensory perception is also something which is
Mm-hmm.
falsifiable, let's remove that assumption entirely.
Mm-hmm.
Now when I remove that assumption of sensory perception, what is remaining? The only thing
Mm-hmm.
that is real is the process of observing, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
the fact that I can observe. Whether I can observe
Mm-hmm.
real, whether I can observe unreal, does not matter, right?
Yeah.
Just observing exists. And I cannot even prove you exist or any of these commenters exist either, right? This can also be
Mm-hmm.
things that are being fed to my brain.
Yeah.
So just like
Yeah. But that's, to me, that's too far skeptical. That's like,
I'm
yeah, but I get what you're saying.
I,
Yeah, I mean, it's the hard solipsism, if I say that word right. I never
yeah.
say solipsism right. But yeah,
So
uh, it's an
so the,
unsolvable thing. We just have to say reality is real. Let's move on. Or like I like to
so
put it, lobsters
so
exist.
my understanding is the only thing then that exists is the fact that there is observing going on, right? I don't even know if there is a me, but I know for a fact there is observation going on. The process of
Mm,
observation itself is the only provable things by the virtue of me using it, essentially. So if I remove all assumptions, and that is the only thing that is remaining, then in the entire universe, in all of existence, the only thing that is there is the process of observing. And that is
mm.
exactly what Advait Vedant is.
Ah,
That is exactly what Kashmir
but
Shaivism is.
but here's the thing: observing requires us, and we
No,
know
that is an assumption that we make.
well.
That is the main thing. So there is a disagreement of sorts
Yeah,
even in Hinduism.
right. Yeah,
That is why there are two schools of thought. There is a school of thought which believes that the observer himself is the only real thing because there is
yeah,
observation going on, and then there is
right.
another school of thought which takes it even a step beyond.
So,
They're like, even you are assuming an observer. The only thing that is genuinely being experienced is observation itself. Even the
mhm,
experiencer is an assumption that you're making. So
right. But when,
they end up forming two
but how
different
does
schools of thought.
that? I mean, how does that get around? Because the I don't know what the particular name of the god is that, or is there more than one? I'm not sure because I'm very I totally don't know anything about your religion. I have no
Mhm.
idea. So, I only know. I know Shiva the Destroyer offhand. That's it. That's the only thing I know. But and only because it was such a cool name, I'm like, I like that. Yeah, that's great.
The, I think it's just the fact that again these have a long history, but
Yeah.
Shiva doesn't necessarily mean for all schools of thought the same destroyer being, right?
Ah,
The
okay,
word
right.
Shiva itself means
Shiva.
stillness. That is
Okay,
the word.
stillness.
That is the
Ooh,
meaning of the word. So
interesting.
everyone, like, there are so many different
Right. So
understandings,
there, yeah.
but at the
So
Hinduism and Dharmic philosophy that includes Buddhism to a
right.
certain extent, all just like agree on one thing: either
Mm-hmm.
nothing exists, or just the process of observing, or there is an observer which exists.
Mm-hmm.
That is the
But
core of reality that they understand.
when the observer itself still need to be observed, then so you
So
just move the
it's
you
like
move.
again, it's again that is why there is that school of thought which just says that the process of observing is happening. But it's
Right.
like assume you are sitting in a void, you are an observer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can still look at your hand.
We're kind of like
That
all
is
the Red King's dream
yeah.
comes to mind, or the
So I think
uh
there is Taraka Shaivism, which believes that Shiv, the God himself, or just the observation, is just looking at different parts of his body, and as he's looking at different parts of his body, that those are what we consider to be individual beings. I am
mm,
just one cell who's being looked at by the soul observation, the process
okay.
of observation.
All right. Well, I think that's kind of I don't. We didn't really get to any necessary agreement, but I didn't think we would, and that's fine. And it's interesting to understand you a little bit more, and your ideas a little bit more, and maybe you understand my ideas a little bit more. Who knows? I don't. I hope so. And
Yeah, I really do.
hopefully it was
It was a nice
interesting to everybody
conversation.
else. I've got some comments or questions for you because I asked the
Sure.
little chat. I was like, hey guys, ask questions to this guy. So now I'm gonna put those on the screen and ask you the questions as I see them. Here we go. Okay, so skeptically pissed asks, can you demonstrate that your God is more than your imagination?
Yes, because I am observing right now, and that is something which is the only thing that is again happening. The only it's like uh, the way that you test any phenomena is by partaking in the process of observing. And observing itself, therefore, is always assumed to be true at the end of the day because it is happening to you. And that
So
is what my particular God is.
let me ask a follow up then. So is observation God then in this case?
Yes.
Okay.
Observation or God in that particular understanding is just one real thing, right? They just mean the real thing. That's all. That is why I even use in my video that one phrase, Tatsam Asi, which just means that you are.
Mm. Okay, Mighty Scarlick, whatever. I'm going to mispronounce your name. How does your God belief excuse you of the problem of solipsism? I just said that. We just talked about that. I don't know that it does, but okay. Well, does it? I don't know. I think that's kind of loaded, but we'll let you deal with it.
I just like rewind if you find
just
a
say,
particular thing. Just like just come onto my channel and just like
right. Would it be
berate me in the comments and give me how I'm wrong.
Would it be fair to say that
way.
maybe God doesn't remove the problem of hard solipsism? Would you agree or disagree or?
I think it's just ultimately there is a way of understanding reality in Hinduism which is niti, which is not this, not that. The way you go about understanding reality is you remove false realities. Okay, this can't be real. This can't be real.
Right.
And if you are left with nothing, then that is what shunyata is a concept in Buddhism. They believe nothing is real.
Yeah,
that is their understanding.
I like this from Blaster. Never go full solipsism. Yeah. Okay, now this is another kind of malformed-ish question, but we'll ask it anyways. How can you dismiss the scientific method if you have zero idea how it is applied?
I'm not saying the I don't think I'm dismissing the scientific method as much as I'm like aligning it with other theistic arguments, right? I'm saying that this is the scientific method, this is the particular sort of reasoning that they use, and this can be similar to the reasoning that theists are using. So it is not exactly, again, formal logic. That is the only claim that I'm making, right? I'm not disproving that it is wrong. I am saying that it works, and there is a sort of underlying assumptions that we take on the basis of certain things in science. That is how scientific method works, and it's similar to certain other arguments that people make for God.
Okay, Mighty Scarlac back again. How do you know revelation is from the God you think is real? Well, I don't know that we talked about revelation at all, so
I don't have a God with revelation, so at least that isn't going to be a problem.
Okay, so that question doesn't apply. Fair enough. How is your observation a demonstration for God? Well, if the two are the same, then I guess
observation is a demonstration for observation. It is happening, and therefore that is the only thing that is being claimed to be true.
And then I think that this is the last question. I'm not sure. Might have some more, but Mick Tilt asks if everyone Earth can observe. Let me rephrase what he said. If everyone on Earth can observe, does everyone have a different God? That's what he wanted to say. He wrote it in a weird way. But...
I just want to ask Mick, how do you know I exist right now? How do you know any of us exist right now? Or you're just not typing into the void, or even the fact that you're typing. That is the main thing. You're not assuming anyone else's existence either.
So if everyone can observe, which everyone can, as well, not everybody, but most people, then does everyone have a different God? I guess is the question.
No, it's the same God viewing from all of our perspective in a way, you can say that, or the fact that for me, see, you can only view reality from your point of view. no matter how much observable testability or objectivity you say, either it is your point of view or it is a democratically agreed upon point of view with five people. But you can only really prove those five perspectives also, or those five peoples also, on the basis of sensory input you get. So they even only exist with through the means of your senses, which can be falsifiable. Therefore, that is still an assumption that they exist.
Okay, then I was wrong. See, Blaster has the final say, maybe. Well, he has the final say now because my brain is done. Can I use the method that theists use and arrive at contradicting positions than they do? And if that's the case, what does that say about the reliability of the method? Wow.
I mean, two or three things. Firstly, you'll have to specify which particular method and what argument like you reach. Essentially, the conclusion that you reach, and why is it contradictory in nature? Because I can't work with just like an abstract contradictory thing. And another way, like once you reach a contradiction, it doesn't matter whether you're scientific, theistic, or whatever. The response to it is not to discard the whole thing, but to see why did it arrive and how can we solve for it.
Okay, well, this has certainly been an interesting conversation. And, you know, I hope that you engage more with people when talking rather than your chat GPT. But whatever you want to do, of course, it's your channel. You do whatever you want. Thank you for your time and energy, and thanks to everybody that participated. Leave comments in the comments section. You guys never do that. I tell you to do it, but they won't do it. Why, Apex Mind? Why? Why won't they do it? I don't know. Anyways, I'm going to eat this lobster
and I see a lot of people have a lot of problems with me. Come to my channel and actually like go through my videos, prove every single one of them wrong, type it in the comment, and I assure you, I'm going to give you a 13-point essay for every single comment that you're going to write. I think deconverted man here can attest to that fact.
Yeah, you know, I mean, we're kindred spirits in that we both like to talk for a long time. So, all right, everybody, I'm gonna hit the button. Apex, stay here so we can say a little bit goodbye after we end the live stream. But now this is the part of the stream where I get silly and go nonsense mode because people have become used to me doing that. I don't know why it became a thing, but it did. All right, everybody, this is where I go nuts. Blah, 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 blah. You happy now? I did the thing. All right, anyways, okay, that's it. And until next time, be skeptical. And after next time, stay skeptical. And what's your little thing that you say at the end, Apex Line? Say that.
And remember, everyone, patterns are everywhere.